I was telling a friend of mine that I needed, I was always looking for wood. And I had seen some spalted wood, and I was telling him that looked really cool. And so he ended up bringing me a truckload of wood. So, advancing, there we go. So a couple years ago, I got this pickup load full of wood, and it was very degraded and punky. And I started to do some research on stabilizing. So this is how I do it. I'm sure there's many other ways to do it. Everybody's probably got little tweaks and techniques that they do, but this is kind of how I do it. So got all this wood, and I decided to invest in a vacuum chamber and pump, and got started. So what was nice was to be able to take this degraded punky wood that, especially in the end grain, it just crumbled out, to stabilize it to make something that was actually really pretty and useful. So I'm going to just pass around a bowl that I did rough out, and you can see just how punky it is. And if you kind of take note of the weight of it, it's actually, this is a little bit lighter than normal wood. So I have some punky wood that is just feather light. So I kind of got on the journey because of that truckload of wood. So a couple things we'll talk about is safety. We always got to talk about safety, equipment, the wood prep process, stabilizing the wood, and turning it, and then just some things to think about, not necessarily problems, but just things to think about. So safety, we always want to be conscious of things. With this, there are going to be some fumes with curing the resin in the oven. And also I get a white fog that comes off my pump. I'm not really sure what that is, but I put it when I'm doing it in the basement. My wood shop is just a fog. There's no residue or anything. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'd like to find some kind of filter for that. There's kind of a fine powder almost that you get, because I'm not sure why, but with turning this, it's different. You sometimes get kind of like when you're sanding the wood, you just get this really fine powder. And so you definitely want to be wearing a mask when you're working with the turning and the sanding. The resin itself is non-hazardous, and the dyes also are not hazardous. The dyes will if you get it on your clothes, it's going to dye your clothes, but it'll wash right off with soap and water on skin and surfaces. So don't really have to worry about that except the mess. So some of the things you're going to need besides wood is a toaster oven. Some people use an old smoker. I bought mine for $10 on Marketplace. It's going to get kind of messy in there, so you don't want to use your normal oven in your kitchen. You'll need a digital scale so you can weigh your wood. When you start, you want to weigh it, and then as you're drying it, you're going to keep weighing it, and then once it finally stops changing weight, then you know that it's completely dry. So some cleanup supplies. I use cactus juice. There are other resins out there that you can buy. They're about $100 a gallon, so it's not a cheap hobby. You can get some dyes. I use Alumilite dye. Those are about $6 a piece, so those aren't too bad. The vacuum chamber and pump, I bought Baco. I bought it online. It was about, this setup back in 2018 was about $200. They do have this is a 3-gallon pot. They do have a 1.5 gallon and a 5 gallon. So that's just, they do have different sizes. I'm sure there's a lot of different manufacturers that you could consider. So you're also gonna, make sure you have a mask. I use gloves just because it's messy. I have a notebook to keep track of the weight as I'm weighing the wood. Um, you're gonna need something to weigh the wood down because it's gonna float in the resin. So I use rocks. Um, different containers so that you don't need to fill the whole pot with the resin. You can put it in smaller pots. I use yogurt containers usually. And you're going to want some oven thermometers. I usually use two because when I'm curing the resin, I want to make sure that I am getting a good temperature. The toaster ovens are notoriously not accurate. So I usually use two oven thermometers and take an average. So you're going to start out by roughing out the wood because the resin is expensive. And so you want to get it, you want to remove as much wood as possible so that you're not going to waste that resin. So I have usually go to about 1 inch thick around. You might be able to go less, I'm not sure, but the wood might warp when you dry it. So you rough it out. And then you're going to dry your wood. So I did, in this picture, I have some pen blanks that I did. You weigh it, you measure it. You're going to make sure, I'm doing it at 200 degrees. I'm not sure, you could probably go 220. It takes usually, those pen blanks probably take 4 or 5 hours to completely dry. Depends on the wood too. I'm usually using pretty dry stuff. If it's dense wood or it's not as seasoned, you might need to go longer. I've heard people online, they might be drying it for over 24 hours. So you just need to keep track of the weight so that you know that it's fully dry. Oh, the other thing is with those pen blanks. So on the right-hand side, I had cut all those pen blanks before I started this process, and I would not do that again. I would keep the full piece of wood, dry it, stabilize it, and then cut it because I did find some warping. So if you end up cutting it close to the size that you need and it ends up bowing, it's not going to work for you then. So that was just one little thing that I noticed with doing the smaller pieces. So then you get to, once it's dry, you want to, once you've hit your dry weight, then you want to let it cool. You're not going to want to put it in the resin hot because it could potentially start curing in the pot before it's actually soaked in. So you get the cactus juice. It has an activator, that little bottle of activator. Once you mix it, then that cactus juice is going to last about a year. You can reuse it over and over and over again. Whatever doesn't absorb into the wood, you can pour back into the jug and just use it again. But hold off putting in the activator until you actually want to use it. Let's see. So this is the setup. It's really pretty simple. There's the pot is a steel pot with a gauge in the front. It's got a tempered glass cover. You want a glass cover because you're going to need to see in the pot as it's under vacuum. It's really simple to use. When you put your product in the pot, you also have to consider the port of where your gauge is. So if you do actually fill the pot with resin, you need to keep it well below that port because when it starts to bubble, you don't want that resin getting into the gauge. So you just got to be conscious of that port. I tend to put my stuff into a different container, just then I don't have to use as much cactus juice. I can do multiple different containers in the pot. If I am using dye, then I can do, 3 different kinds at one time. As I said, the wood is going to float, so you need to weigh it down. And then once, it's probably hard to see because of the reflection, but once it's under vacuum, there we go. So it's going to bubble, and you're going to keep it under vacuum until those bubbles cease. And so you can see the rock. I had a larger bowl in the pot, so that rock held it down. Sometimes you got to put a bunch of stuff if you have small things. But it's just gonna keep bubbling and bubbling. And it may take several hours for those bubbles to stop. Yeah?
So what's causing the bubbles?
When you have the vacuum on, it is pulling the air out of the wood.
Okay.
So, okay.
So it's not boiling really, it's just the air in the wood that's coming out.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, the air in the wood is coming out. So once you've gone through that, once the bubbles have stopped, then you want to make sure you let it soak. That is critical. That is half of what this is about. So you take the vacuum off and you let it sit at least double the time that it's been under vacuum. So if it was 6 hours, you're going to let it soak at least 12. Longer the better. It doesn't hurt to let it soak. I tend to do my stabilizing on the weekend. Just because with the work week, that's when I do it. And so I'll usually finish on Sunday, and then I just let it soak all week. And then the next week, I will do the curing. So dense wood is going to need a little bit longer. Probably I have heard on there's a stabilizing Facebook page, and I follow that. A lot of people on there are doing knife handles. And they're stabilizing it because they're handling it a lot. It can be in wet environments, things like that. So they're stabilizing all kinds of wood. And they may have it under vacuum for a week if it's really dense wood, burls. So you can see on that bottom picture, I did those pen blanks and I cut them in half. And the one on the left is a burl. And it looks like it took the dye really well. But when you cut into it, it actually didn't penetrate as far because it's just so dense. I did do the pen from that blank, and it is in the gallery. And you'll see that you can see a lot of the brown wood, but there's little green flecks in there where the dye actually took. So, and then the piece on the right, that was more degraded spalted maple, and that penetrated fully. So then, after you take it out of the vacuum pot, and you're going to clean it off as much as possible because that resin is, once you start heating it up, it is going to leak out a little bit. So you want to dry it off as much as possible. You can wrap it in foil if you want. If you're going to have a lot of pieces in the oven at one time, you probably want to wrap it because if they touch, they're going to cure together. And I did do the pen blanks. I did not wrap them. A couple of them stuck together, and I just ran them through the bandsaw, so it was fine. But if you were going to stack bowls or something like that, you're going to have a big problem because they're not coming apart if they cure together. So in those cases, then I would wrap it in foil. Preheat the oven to 200 degrees. The sweet spot is 190 to 200 for curing. So you want to preheat it, and then the oven thermometers. So curing cactus juice, I'm not sure about other resins, but cactus juice is 190 to 200. If you go over 200, just more of the resin is going to leak out of the wood. So you want to try to get it in that zone. You know it's done when the center is reached 200 degrees for at least 10 minutes. So for me, it was a lot of testing it out because if you have a bigger piece, how do you exactly know if the center has hit that spot? So I tend to like the pen blanks, an hour and a half was enough. It may have been overkill, I don't know, but at least I knew with the hour and a half that they were done. Bigger bowls are going to take longer. So, And then after you're curing, you're gonna get this resin crust, that's what I call it anyway. This resin that is seeping out of the wood is gonna land somewhere. So either it's gonna be in the bottom of your oven, or, yeah, you can pass that around. Or if you put it in foil, it's gonna, the foil's gonna hold it, but then it's gonna stick to the wood heavier than the rest of it. So that bowl, which this bowl is also in the gallery, that one was laying down in the foil. And so it's got that, the rim has got the crust, but I had also wrapped the foil around the whole thing. And so my tenon got full of this cured resin, and it was just a mangled mess. And so I ended up having to do so much chiseling to be able to get where I could put that tenon back in a chuck. So now, if I have multiple pieces and I am putting foil, I don't wrap the foil all the way around the tenon. I leave that completely open, and then the resin will just kind of, gravity will do what gravity does and pull it away, so you shouldn't end up with this crust around the tenon that you gotta deal with afterwards. And it can get quite messy, so that one on the right, that one, I had it laying on its side. I may have gotten the temperature more than 200 degrees because there was a lot of crusty resin on the one side of it. So back to safety. Again, we always want to make sure we're careful. So eye protection, when I wear an eye protection the whole time I'm in my shop, and mainly because when you're pouring that resin, I mean, it could just dollop and pop in your eyeball. You never know. So, not just when turning, I'm using it all the time. And then ventilation. So with the curing, I normally do my curing between spring and fall, because then I can put my toaster oven on a cart, stick it outside, and let it do its thing, and I don't have to worry about the fumes. So you can see I got my stove fan on, because I did this just to have some video for the demo. I did not want that in my house, so I have my fan cranked for an hour and a half, pulling all my nicely warm house air out, but at least my house didn't smell. So that's why I tend to do mine in the seasons when I can put the oven outside. And then with turning, when I was hollowing out this base, you can kind of see on the tool rest, it's this very fine powdery stuff. And it could be because it's such degraded wood that I'm working with. But you want to have some kind of ventilation. I do have a dust collector similar to that, and I just kind of jerry-rigged a way to pull the dust as I was turning. So, and then when you're turning the wood, like I said, the dyed surface color, I mean, it's probably going to be deceiving. So once you get turning, you'll see how well you did with the stabilizing if you're using dye. So in this case, that pen blank, it was pretty green on the outside, but then as it's turned, you can see that it's not quite as far in with the burl. It kind of is chippy, and again, it could be the wood I'm using. So very sharp tools to keep that under control. And then I wear a mask even during cleanup, because as you're kind of sweeping around, that is just still getting airborne. So I'm always wearing my mask. Ooh, where do we go? Oh, on the bottom? Okay, thank you. So that bowl over there, on the bottom of it, I was mentioning it's chippy. So on that bowl, it was one of the first ones I did. And as I was removing the tenon, I had that little nub, and I was chiseling the nub off, and a whole chunk went out with it. And so it was just way too deep to try to repair. So I ended up taking a Forstner bit, and I cleaned it out and did a 2-part epoxy with some dye in, and just to hide it, because there's no way to repair it. So And then you can do multiple colors. If you do go on any YouTube sites or YouTube videos or Facebook sites, you could see some amazing stuff that people have done with dye. Those knife handles that people do, it's just amazing. And they're doing 2, 3, 5 colors, and it's really quite beautiful. But the difference in the process is you're going to soak your wood in one color and then dry it off. You're going to cure it. You don't vacuum. You're going to cure it just from the soak. And then after you cure it, you're going to sand it to clean off the surface. And then you can put it in your next color. And either you can do that cycle again, or you can put it then under vacuum. And then once you've vacuumed, then you would cure it.
So that's, I'm assuming that allows the different colors to penetrate to different depths. Is that how that works?
Yes, and if you would not do the curing in between, then the colors will just kind of meld and maybe muddy.
Oh,
so you can kind of set that color with that curing. You can let it soak as long as you want. I let them soak those pen blanks maybe an hour, and it gets enough. So this is one example though of doing a couple colors. You can see the natural color on the left. Then I did a bluish teal green, then blue. Then as I was turning it, you can see it just looks so dull and boring. But then once you get the finish on, it really pops and there's just so much color. And it's surprising to me, as wood turners, we all know, you just never know what you're going to get as you turn. And just some of the most beautiful stuff comes out. I'm surprised at areas that don't take any dye at all, that I don't know if it's so dense or that's the only thing I can think of, is that the wood is so dense, it's just not absorbing in those areas. But the wood, it's just amazing with the color, I think. The vase on the right, that was not a 2-color dye. It was just the type of wood and how, part of it's more green and the other part of it is more blue. Yeah, so I just think it's really pretty.
So do you notice, like, when you have dye in with the cactus juice,
Mm-hmm.
will the cactus juice penetrate deeply and then the dye doesn't? Like when you said there was no color in the middle, is it still treated?
Nope, it's the dye is with the cactus juice, and so
they travel together.
They travel together.
Okay.
Yep. So, and just a couple things to note, that the dye will bleed if it's touching other wood. So that piece on the bottom, I had done natural pieces and then some that were blue. And then I took them out of the pot, dried them off a little bit, and I carried them up in a container, and I had the natural on the bottom and a blue piece on top. And I took it up, and then I'm, getting the oven and getting things going. And that was just enough time for the blue to bleed into that natural piece. And, moisture wicks together, so the moisture was probably from the natural piece was pulling in the blue. I didn't care, but it just, I never had noticed that before because I had never done a bunch of pieces together like that, but it will bleed together. And I had mentioned that the pieces will cure together, so you got to be careful. I think it's very chippy. You don't get the ribbons of wood like you do with natural wood or with resin casting like Ed does. So it's kind of chippy. This resin is not going to fill voids like the resin casting does. So it's penetrating the wood, and that's what you're getting. So if you have wormholes or big voids, it's not going to fill that. So you need to do the resin casting for that. I had mentioned the warping, that if your pieces are too small and you're drying them, they may warp on you. So if you can, depending on what you're doing, if you can keep it intact and then cut it after the process might be better. I think it feels different. You've injected a plastic basically into the wood. So, if you pick up that bowl in the gallery, it just has a different texture to it. Not bad, just different. So just to be aware of that. And then consider, if you're going to get into this, consider what you want to do so that you know what size pot you want to get. You don't want to get the small pot and then decide later that you want to do platters and bowls and things like that. So just to be thinking ahead on what you may want to be doing in the future with it. So.
Lisa, is there any downside to a bigger pot, even if you're doing smaller things?
I don't think so, because you can put smaller containers in there. I don't think there's any downsides besides the additional cost to buy the pot. But because I'm using individual containers in the pot, I'm not filling that chamber. So for me, I don't see a downside to it. So, and I always have to get a picture of my dog in there.
Tools, are you using strictly carbide or?
I'm using both, but I tend to use carbide more.
Finishing, are you buffing?
For finishing, I am sanding, I'm going through like a pen blank, or a pen type, what is that, 12,000 or something like that. I'm going through all of those grits, and then the finish is not gonna absorb like it would with wood. So I tend to use some type of, like a microcrystalline wax or buffing, something like that. I am not, I don't use poly. I just have never really used it. I'm not sure how well it would work on this or not, but like a Mahoney's oil or something like that, it's not going to really soak in. So, yep.
You mentioned in the beginning that you mix the activator, and then did you say you can dump the excess back into the jug?
So once you activate, so you put the activator in the jug of the gallon jug of the cactus juice, shake it up. And then once you've used it, so you put it in the pot, you did your project, and then you have leftover, you can put that back in the jug and reuse it over and over and over again. It doesn't evaporate. It's not going to cure on its own. As long as you keep it at a normal temperature, it will stay stable for about a year and a half. So, that answer it?
Yep.
Okay.
Did you keep the colors separate if you used colors in the cactus juice?
Yeah, I have like three different gallon jugs. And one's got the blue, one's got the green, one's got the red, and then I got the natural. And so, yeah, I just put it back in the color that you started with.
When you cure between colors, does that kind of plug the ports or the ports on the wood?
Oh, for as far as that resin has penetrated and you've cured it, then yeah, that color is going to be stable in that part of the wood. And then when you do your second color, the rest of the wood that hasn't taken up any resin will soak in for that other color.
Waiting for me to get out of the book.
Okay.
So when you're talking about wrapping the pen blanks in tin foil.
Yep.
You wrap them individually.
Yeah, and what I normally do is, you can take a sheet of foil and wrap one, and then wrap another, and then wrap the next. So you don't have to individually do them, but just so they're not touching. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you let it soak and you got the cactus roots exposed to the air, it doesn't start drying out or anything.
Nope, doesn't evaporate, doesn't dry. Yep.
As far as soaking goes, have you ever just soaked and not vacuumed?
I have not, but I'm sure you can. It's probably not going to penetrate as deep. Ed's got something to say.
I do that all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you, how,
For how long do you soak it?
So the question is what you're starting with. If you're starting with really dense wood, like Lisa said, you have to soak it longer.
Right.
If you're starting with really punky wood, you don't have to soak it long because it absorbs quicker.
Makes sense.
The key is how dry the wood is. So I tend to over dry my wood if I'm soaking something. Lisa said she dries her wood for a couple hours, 4 hours for a thin plank. It's not unusual if I'm gonna soak, I'll dry mine for 12. So there's absolutely no moisture in there, and then I put it in my stuff and let it soak a week, like she said.
And how much penetration do you get? Is it just a surface
No,
coating or?
no, it goes through, if you go to the Cactus Juice website, they have a chart, really nice chart, where they talk about vacuum and soak. Lisa's getting, according to their website, Lisa's with the vacuum chamber is probably getting a 300%. Wood, what did they say? Wood weight difference, right? So 300% of, and with just soaking, the max they were able to get was like 200%. So if you have a really bad clunky piece of wood that you just want to like save and then do something else with, and the reason I soak most often is because I'm just going to turn around and put resin over it anyway. So I don't need to worry about that. The one thing I will say loud and clear is if you're using dyes, soaking doesn't work. It will get in the wood, but you will not get color saturation like these things. So if you're going to dye it, you pretty much have to vacuum. And if it's really dense, you have to vacuum.
Any other?
Yeah, you've got the same system I have.
Mhm.
And it comes with a glass top. People should avoid the temptation to save a few dollars and go with one of the ones with the plastic or plexiglass or Lexan tops because they crack. And once they start to crack, they won't hold vacuum anymore.
All right, so Jerry said, yeah, make sure you get a glass top, not cheap out and get plastic because it will crack and then it's not gonna work for you. So some of these also, some have the gauge on the top, so you don't have to worry so much about where the port is relative to your resin. So depending on the design, the gauge actually might be right out the top.
Lisa, what vacuum do you go to, or do you just set it so that it basically boils?
That's a good point. So I tend to, when I first put it in, it's gonna just boil like crazy. And so I will be playing with this lever here. And can you read the gauge, what the full is on there? Is it 30?
Yes.
Yeah, 30 PSI would be the full vacuum. So, once it isn't raging anymore, boiling, then I'll put it on the full vacuum and then just let it sit. But if I take, I don't know, sometimes 10 minutes of just kind of playing with that lever before putting it on full vacuum, especially if you have resin in the chamber and that port is, even if the resin is that far below the port, I mean, that is just gonna boil up and it could hit the port. So, any other?
So as it's boiling up, you're releasing the pressure
Yes,
and then then close it, let it boil up again.
Yep.
Release the pressure, just to try to keep it
yep,
below where you need it.
right, exactly. If the resin is way below the port, then I don't care.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah. All right.
You called that a 3-gallon. You said that was a 3-gallon.
This is a 3-gallon, they have a 5-gallon and a 1.5 for this manufacturer. So that, as far as I know, that's all they have, are those 3. So, yeah. Well, thanks. You got questions later, just let me know. I'm around.
Thank you.